Guys, thanks for joining us today. Super excited to be having this webinar with Adam, who I'll introduce here in a second. So thanks for joining us Thursday afternoon here. Still morning for some of us, but getting into the afternoon. Just wanted to start with a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to have a Q&A at the end for Adam. I know we're going to have a lot of cool stuff to talk about. So any questions that come up, feel free to throw them into the Q&A. We'll try to keep an eye on them, but we'll definitely address them all at the end. As you may have heard, it's being recorded. So when we're done, I'll distribute this through email. If you've registered, it'll also go up on our YouTube channel with the rest of the videos that you can access. So if you can't stick around the whole time, you'll definitely get a recording of it. So I'm thrilled to have Adam join me. Adam, I think the idea of this webinar, came up over some drinks one time. Adam is one of those guys, and I'll let you introduce yourself and your background, but he's one of those guys that I can say, like, every time I get an email from him that's like, hey, we have a new project to work on, I definitely get excited. So Adam's with Strategic Insight Group, and it's a private intelligence firm. Do a lot of cool stuff, so I'm glad Adam's here. We've known each other for a few years now. Adam worked on tens of projects. I think we can talk about a few of them, which are pretty fun. And so, it's always exciting to hear what you talk about. I think the cool thing about having you on is my webinars usually focus on the technical side of security for these SEC registered firms. Do your vulnerability scans, do your employee testing, that sort of thing. Whereas you really focus on the human side of things. And Adam's my go-to guy for any kind of due diligence or background checks that firms may be looking to do. So definitely excited to have him on. And Adam, I'll let you take it away and tell us a little bit about you, your background, and what you do at SIG.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Brian, and thank you everyone for joining us. I started here at Strategic Insight Group about 7.5 years ago as an analyst, and like Brian said, we're a private intelligence firm, and we do a number of different things, but really our bread and butter and the sole practice of our business and our research that really all our other services stem from is on the human side, the investigative side, usually for investors, and that generally comes in two forms: pre-investment due diligence prior to the closing of transactions, and employee background investigations, generally for high-level executives or for individuals requiring specific licensing. And so, as we'll talk about, a lot of those times, you'll see, risks that weren't necessarily presented initially, either, before investing with an individual or a firm, or hiring a particular individual. We see a lot of these insider threats kind of extend from, the individuals themselves, right? We're very human based. So that's a little bit about what we do. Looking forward to sharing some more and getting, diving into the weeds on some of the projects that we've worked on together. Getting into it.
Awesome. Yeah, take it away.
Okay, perfect. So I'll share my screen here with everybody, and I will pull up the presentation we have for you all. All right, Brian, are you able to see everything?
I'm good to go.
Perfect. Okay, so we will go back to the beginning here. Obviously, we'll be discussing insider threats here today. I already, said a little bit about, what we do here, but here's a little bit more of a background on Strategic Insight Group, or we call it SIG, and what we do. Like I said, we're a private intelligence firm founded in 1999. So we've been going at it almost 30 years now. And we've been in the Dallas-Fort Worth area originally we were founded in Fort Worth and moved over to Dallas here a few years ago. And really the core basis of our business is identifying risk and opportunities, and really risk mitigation. And like I said, a lot of that is the background intelligence on individuals, and those can come in legal, the form of legal risks, headline risks, and reputational risks, as well as behavioral risks. And I think when we go into a little bit more here in this presentation, we'll see how due diligence can help us signal some of those behavioral risks that are in many cases what materializes as insider threats. And then we also, kind of branching out from this core of research that we do, we also do political and geopolitical risk analysis as well, litigation and regulatory risks, and as you can see, several other areas. So really risk focused in whatever forms those come in for our clients. And so when we move on to insider threats, there's really three major kinds that we generally see, at least primarily from the human element. And one of those that we see pretty frequently, and I think this really happens to many organizations, are the negligent insider threats. And this is a lot of the case. It'll occur during a phishing attempt, where employee makes an error, accidentally responds to a phishing email, and Brian, feel free to jump in with any examples as we move throughout here. But that's a common threat that we see. Another form, and like I mentioned, the behavioral risks that come with hiring employees, are the malicious insider threats. Which obviously is when somebody attempts to threaten an organization, usually through things like intellectual property theft. A lot of the time this occurs when there may be a disgruntled employee, and we'll talk about an example of that here shortly. And the final element is complacent insider threats, when we're kind of careless about what our security protocols and best practices are, or if we don't necessarily keep up with the changing dynamics of security as we move along, as technology and the ability for folks to breach an organization from the inside or from the outside are advanced.
And Adam, if you would, I wanted to connect that a little bit to some of the things we've talked about before, especially with the negligent threats, and connect it to the technical side of things, because employees a lot of times don't even know they're being negligent, right? Like,
yeah,
when I'm doing these threat analysis, one of the first things I look for is publicly shared calendars. It's such a huge problem, because let's say we have an organization that's based on like Google Workspace or Office 365 or Salesforce, like any of these major things. They're all built in with the technology to share your calendar, right? So, people at these firms open up marketing apps, and they open up, email apps, and they connect all of these things to the data. And when they do that, they produce these like calendar codes that, they have this like 20-digit, 25-digit random number at the end. And they share it, and that's how information is flowing between the two apps. And the problem is, while that looks like a secure link, it looks like secure, what you're really doing is just publicly sharing your calendar. And when we put a computer on it, it's really easy to figure out what those digits are and to figure out what public calendars are available at organizations. So, a lot of things like, a lot of times the employees don't even know they're being negligent. The other thing that we'll look for is anytime there's been a document that's publicly shared, same thing. You may think that long digit behind your Office doc is secure, but it's really easy for a computer to guess. And if you have one employee who accidentally, shares all instead of like share to a group or share to the insiders, you now have a document that is publicly available on the internet for the rest of its life. It's not going away. And so, sorry, just wanted to connect that to a couple of the technical things we've talked about in the past, and what this really looks like for an organization trying to deal with these issues, and how do you figure out when do you have an employee that's being negligent, right? Like, how do you actually know? So anyway, just connecting that to the technical side.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And even, going back to your calendar example, we have a lot of meetings with people, with external folks that aren't within our organization. And you'll see, when we're scheduling a meeting, you'll often see if somebody shares, a platform. Sometimes, if their calendar is public, like you said, you can see exactly when folks are having other meetings, and obviously that can be damaging. And the vast majority of the time, people aren't aware of it, like you said.
Precisely. Yep, precisely.
So moving on to indicators of insider threats. So and this is something that often can be in ways difficult to detect. It could be missing or deleted folders, moving of folders to incorrect locations. And I think, on the unuse of unsanctioned software and hardware, I think, Brian, if you have any, further examples, folks attempting to use, different hardware or software than what's provided by the company. If there's an insistence upon, a certain software or hardware, and that goes the same for privileges or permissions. And there's a few examples there. But essentially folks asking for, security or information access and privileges that are beyond the scope of what their job entails. Those are some ways that we can, when we're working with clients, particularly if they believe they've had an insider threat, or if there's the existence of an insider threat within their organization. That's something that we look at. Are there folks exhibiting unusual behavior? Again, whether that's requesting certain security, or whether that be accessing information that's beyond their general scope and the core of their job.
And there's just so much here, especially as it relates to SEC compliance. Talking about escalated privileges and permissions, one of the things I always tell my clients is the CEO is not always the admin, right? Like, our traders should not have access to accounting software, and accounting should not have access to trading. Compliance should have access to everything. And the SEC is very clear about that we have to have some kind of user access rights. And it's for, all these reasons that you're talking about. The programs like Dropbox, Google Drive, all these mainstream programs, there's ways to go in and do this and figure this out, like you said, right? Like, it's all about settings, making sure you're having the monitoring in place and that sort of thing. And that's really easy to build out once we know what a firm's infrastructure looks like and how to protect it. The thing that always gets me about insider threats, and especially when I'm working with smaller firms that, maybe they're under 25 people, they don't quite have a dedicated IT team, they're one or 2 billion in AUM, and everyone has brought their own device to the network, right? Everyone's using their personal iPhone to check client data, communicate with clients. Those phones go missing. We don't exactly have good protocols over employee phones. It's and the problem is, it's really hard to have a bring your own device policy and allow employees to maintain a certain level of privacy in their private life, and also capture everything that we need, and be able to wipe that device in case something goes. So, even unusual data movement doesn't actually always have to mean, hey, someone plugged in a USB, which, that's definitely a major threat, right? But it could also be, hey, someone lost their cell phone and we don't have the ability to wipe it. We don't know if it was encrypted. We don't know, if there was a password on it. So a lot of things like that are things that we've talked about on past webinars to kind of look at.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's one of the more common examples. I mean, simply losing an iPhone, on a hike, or misplacing your laptop going through security at an airport. If you're using that for company purposes, all of a sudden that turns into an enormous, security threat, right? And I think those are probably some of the most common, instances in which there is, a rush to panic, where, we have this major threat, and like you said, there are so many unknowns, but at the same time, there were no barriers or fences put in place in order to deal with that threat. like you said, no ability to wipe the computers. And so, yeah, again, especially for small firms, that's an area where, we see, significant issues as well. So we've talked a little bit about the kinds of threats, how to detect threats, and now we're getting to the core. Okay, so we understand what these threats are, and there's a number of different ways in which they can manifest themselves. So how do we deal with them? And particularly when it comes to behavioral threats, the way in which we advise our clients to begin as a best practice is to utilize comprehensive background screening for all new hires, but especially those that have access to privileged information. A lot of the time, so our research process when we're conducting an investigation goes from broad to narrow. We look at every single data point from criminal records, litigation, judgments and liens, which could be, back taxes, whether that's back property taxes or what have you, and pull all these individual data points together and get a bigger picture for our client. So it may not be one particular data point, but collectively those can give us an insight into patterns of behavior and whether or not this may represent a threat to the client moving forward. And one thing I think a lot of the time we'll have clients complete the initial backgrounding process and think, okay, the employee passed their background check, great, everything is fine from here. But obviously there are changing situations, right? People's lives change, their behavior may change based on their social circumstances or their financial circumstances. And so one thing that we've been seeing more of, and we continue to advise our clients, especially for their employees, is some element of recurring background screening. And this could be done quarterly, it could be done annually, to make sure that kind of the risk profile that we discussed earlier hasn't changed, and if it has, to understand why. Because a lot of the time that can represent a level of threat from within your own organization. Brian and I actually worked on a case a few years ago together where this was extremely prominent, and it's difficult to do with all employees, but in this particular case, our client was having an issue where an outside threat was, what was perceived to be an outside threat was creating LinkedIn profiles on behalf of the CEO of our client. And they were saying a lot of malicious things, and they were attempting to scrub the information from LinkedIn, but that's a time-consuming process, and once one account was deleted, another would be created. And so when they came to us, and Brian and I worked together on this, we thought, okay, there's a very good chance that this is an insider threat rather than an external threat. Mm-hmm. And in this case, it ended up being a disgruntled employee that was going through some personal and financial issues with the company, and was in the process of being laid off. And so this is a typical example, right, of where potentially a behavioral screen, a recurring background screen on an employee may have uncovered some of those issues. And we'll get into some of the difficulties. Obviously sometimes layoffs are going to occur in an organization, but exit interviews, and we'll talk about that later, are often a great way to not necessarily only improve your organization, but get a good barometer on how an employee is feeling after they move on. And we do that internally. But it's also a great practice to do because you generally get a good sense in many cases of who may represent a threat to your organization, particularly, again, folks that have had access to some sensitive and insider information for your company. And then so we also get within employee monitoring, We get more a little bit onto the technical side, where you can, obviously utilize software to monitor and track activity, like we mentioned earlier. And then I think what's important too is to regularly conduct, a holistic assessment of your own organization. Understand where there may be specific vulnerabilities within your own procedures, within your own people, and make sure to conduct those consistently, to make sure that you're keeping up with some of the particularly with some of the software and software changes that are taking place, and structural changes that may be taking place within your organization.
And Adam, I'll just kind of throw out there, this is one of the areas where you guys really excel at, and I think that actually kind of started our relationship, where you guys came to me and were like, hey, we need to do some dark web research. And I can't remember if the case you cited was one of the first we worked on or not, but
I believe so.
Yeah, and I think essentially, it kind of boiled down to, we were able to boil it down to 3 people who we thought might be the threat, and then we're able to go to the client, and they're like, oh, yep, this is the guy, right? Like, he used to work for us. And so, it's easy to go and find them afterwards sometimes, especially for people who don't have a good OPSEC. But my point being that, working with you guys, I learned so much about this process. Like, I knew this a little bit, but what you guys brought to the table and what you were able to figure out about these people and learn about them, definitely helped in my investigations. And I just thought it was really cool. And for me, always being a small business owner, I've been very lucky with the people I've hired, right? And knocking on wood here. Well, what do you suggest for firms that, maybe they're small, right? Like, maybe maybe there's 4 or 5 guys, there's 2 partners, and they're trying to bring on another partner, and the budget's only so much, and so what do you do when you're dealing with a little bit of a limited budget, and you've got to make this, this really important hire? What's kind of your advice on that? I know that's one issue I've heard from my clients. It's like, I mean, the budget only goes so far, and this is such an important position. Like, how do we maximize making sure that this is going to be a good background check?
Right, absolutely. That's a great question, and I think a lot of our clients, whether they're small businesses or whether they're large investors, a lot of the time they face similar budget constraints, and it's just relative. If it's a large investor that needs to look into 20 different subjects and the background history of an entire company, and pending litigation and reputational risks, that's also a significant element of their budget as well. But particularly for small businesses, this is something that we've understood, I think, for some time. And so the way in which we structure our levels of investigation, regardless of the level, whether that be an entry level of investigation, which is kind of our basic sweep, or whether that's more of a bespoke project for a very, very large investor, we always look at the same pinpoint measures. We always conduct a background sweep on open source media. We always look at litigation. We always look at criminal records, tax liens. Really, the difference is the timeline. So for us, at least, we have kind of a 5-year timeline for our entry level investigations, and as you proceed through our different levels, you get to an unlimited scope. For what I would recommend for a small business is honestly do what you can, because even a basic background investigation can reveal significant information, significant threats about past history, past performance. One thing that is a part of all our disclosed investigations, meaning our client will provide, we'll give our client a copy of our release and disclosure form, which is completed by their potential new hire. That allows us to look at credit information. That allows us to see, do they have any delinquent accounts? That allows us to verify their education, verify their employment history directly. rather than using only open source methods. And so that's something that I think is a more cost-effective way, coming to us and say, okay, these are our constraints from a budget standpoint. How can we make sure that the person that we're going to be employing is the person that they've presented to us and that we think they are. And so, making sure that you find the right firm that has options within your price point, making sure that they do cover a lot of those things, making sure that they are able to obtain, information like credit history, verifying, they went to college, where they said they did, making sure they graduated, making sure that their resume checks out and they did hold the positions and responsibilities that they say they do. So to me, it's finding the right balance. And I think for clients that are smaller businesses, even if it's disclosed entry-level investigation, I think for U.S. subjects, that almost always comes in total below $1,000. And if that's something that is not necessarily always feasible, we even have cases where we'll work with a client and focus only on litigation, or we'll only focus on reputational risks or criminal records or whatever, kind of information that they feel is most relevant, or complete, merely the qualification verification. So really just finding somebody that will work with you and understand what your needs are and understand what your constraints are as well. But I think what we found is, the small investment at the beginning of the process is generally worth it in the long term. And we've seen, cases in the past where, rather than verifying, the vast majority of the time, there are no significant red flags, which is great, right? That's great for the client. That's great for the employee. But, in the times where they are, rather than, costing several $100s or $1,000 at the beginning of the process, if this actor turns into an insider threat, right, for whatever the reason may be down the line, it could, very quickly become a process that costs, tens of thousands of dollars, whether that be through litigation or having to hire somebody like the both of us to do a more comprehensive sweep at a later date to figure out where, the insider threat is located. So that's generally what I would say, and find a group that you can work with, and make sure that you understand the process and understand what data points within somebody's background, their behavioral profile, are going to be most important to your organization. So, moving on, again, dealing with insider threats, employee training. I think this is one that is absolutely critical. I can speak to our own firm, where, we have a compliance, an internal compliance officer that is very, very heavily focused because of the nature of our work. I think we probably get more phishing attempts than a lot of other groups, although if you're in the financial field, this also applies. And making sure that your employees understand, what phishing campaigns might look like. Again, that's something we talked about earlier with the potential for negligent threats. And making sure that your training processes are regularly updated as some of these technologies and techniques advance. And again, promoting whistleblowing from within your organization. This is probably something that in a lot of small businesses we don't necessarily see, but always ensuring that making sure your employees, if they see something suspicious, to make sure that they go ahead and say something and report it. Another thing that we touched upon a little bit earlier is that separation of duties. So making sure that folks within security have their security responsibilities and security protocols. And then folks that are in human resources have their specific protocols as well. And not having this overlap of important information, access to important systems and data. That's one thing that I think is key, especially if you're a small organization. I know, it's very tempting to wear a lot of hats, especially if you're experiencing a growth period. But it's critical to be able to isolate those variables. So if you do detect a threat, you can more easily understand where it's coming from. And then the final thing, like I mentioned earlier, conducting exit interviews. This is a great way to feel, past employee sentiment to your organization, understand if they have a particular bone to pick. And in our experience, this has been extremely helpful, and it's been helpful to our clients narrow down threats from the inside that were past employees to be able to determine, where some of those, whether it be a negative social media posts, or intellectual property theft if the individual moves on to another organization. These are very good indicators of understanding who may represent a potential risk after they move on from your organization. And so again, how does this due diligence process minimize your risk of insider threats? Again, it's early detection. An ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, and I think that's something that we try to express to our clients, and that I would say to anybody that asks is it's a lot easier to identify potential threats early on, and make sure that they don't become a part of your organization, or detect these issues early, rather than have them manifest and linger within your organization for a long period of time. And again, being proactive to reduce the risk of data breaches. Some of the things that Brian mentioned earlier, and feel free to jump in at any point, but making sure things like access to data controls and data handling policies are up to date, and that you have strong procedures in place to help minimize the opportunity for that sensitive information to be compromised. And then, again, we go back to the people within your company, holding employees accountable, and making sure that they know what their role entails, making sure that there's clear expectations for everybody within your organization. I think not only does that make a better workplace environment, and I think that in and of itself helps to minimize disgruntled employees, which so frequently are the main insider threats within your organization. But it also enables us to really identify where things go wrong. If we know that this particular breach in data came from somebody that only the human resources department would have access to, rather than human resources and operations and security, well, then we're much more easily able to pinpoint where this potential threat exists. And that's all I have for everyone. And that will
That's good stuff, Adam. There was one thing you talked about I wanted to just kind of touch on it, because I've never, until I saw your slideshow, it never really hit me. But like the exit interview and how important that could be. I guess I've never really, before we chatted, never really understood how important that can be, and gauging what's that employee temperature like. Are they going to do us harm? It's kind of like, I think anytime we're investigating any kind of big issue, cyber issue, threat issue, anything like that against a firm, one of the first questions is always, what ex-employee did it, or what current employee is doing it. It's kind of like a murder, right? Like most of the time it's going to be the spouse. most of the time it's going to be an ex-employee. So I think an exit interview is a solid idea that I've just never really connected those two dots.
Yeah,
The other,
absolutely. And that's something we follow internally. You know, that's one of the most important aspects of our overall strategy within our organization, particularly within our HR procedures, because, you know, somebody is leaving, they may be going to a competitor, right? I think that's something that, you know, especially if you work in a field like ours, or you work within finance, that's something where you have access at almost every level to some component of critical information, right?
yeah.
And then in our case, you know, at the analyst level, the folks that are conducting a lot of our due diligence research, you know, they have access to things like personal information, right? Information about companies. So it's very important for us to make sure that we follow these protocols ourselves, right? To understand and minimize, you know, the potential for any threats from past employees. And I think part of that too, and this is, I think, a little bit more in your wheelhouse, but I wanted to bring it up, you know, things like access to information on a company server, right? Making sure that if somebody is being terminated, that their access is cut in a way that, you know, allows you to prevent, you know, deletion of information, right? Things like that, protocols like that are things that we've seen that really help, you know, minimize potential damage. So.
No, that's a great tip. And you know, the other thing to touch on too, I think that you and I have kind of talked about before is the employee training. And you know, I have a product called Fieldcraft that we go out and we deploy. And I think one of the interesting things about the way we test for it is, you know, like, you know, you get the no before email, you get a report, yes, no, did you click on it? But with Fieldcraft, it's actually like, how did this person interact with the email? Did they scroll over the link? Did they see where the link was going? And that's great. And you know, we try to do the best that we can with the training. I think it's a really cool product, and it you know, it meets all the SEC requirements, but it's really, really hard to train your employees to the real world and do it in an ethical way.
Yeah.
And it's a conversation that while we do the phishing training, all very important, right? Like the SEC is going to ask for this documentation. Your employees really do need this training. Like a lot of them don't know about phishing, and phishing is 99% of the time going to be a way that a hacker makes, you know, some kind of move into your network. But you know, real world phishing is dangerous, right? Like we've all gotten the Nigerian scam email. You know, someone needs 2 million laundered out, right? Like in, you know, a million emails go out and 3 people click on it, and that's the kind of return they're looking for. What I'm always concerned about, and what, you know, I have to talk to my employees about, is do the phishing training. That's great, but understand that the real world, they are going to come after you with a knife to your throat, right? Like, and the one example I've shared before was a secretary who had been under surveillance by a hacking group. She had posted on Facebook that her husband was going on a business trip and, you know, staying in the Hilton, Fort Lauderdale. It's a beautiful location. She's going to miss him. It was a very nice post. And then, you know, a day later, she gets an email, a direct email that's like, hey, Cynthia, do you know who this blonde lady is going into a hotel room with your husband? Here's a picture of her, right? They are going to click on that link. Like, you have taken someone out of their standard operating zone and put them into a fear zone, and they're going to click on that link 99% of the time. So
Yeah.
the other big one we saw when COVID was big was an email going around saying, hey, just want to let you know, one of your office mates has COVID and they're not telling anyone. Click here to see who it is, right? And everybody was clicking on that link. So real world phishing is brutal.
Yeah.
If they want in, they're going to come after, you and say they have photos of your kids, they have photos of your spouse. So it's really important to train employees, like, look at the email, take a breath, understand that when you get this kind of email, something out of the norm, take a second, look at it, call in the IT team, and know it's okay to call in the IT team, right?
Yeah.
Like, the IT team has dealt with so much stuff that they have no idea if what you're sending them is real or not. Like if you're concerned about it being a real situation, like they deal with so much of this, they're not going to bat it a second chance, and they'll be able to tell you, yeah, this is definitely a phishing email, right? That
Mhm.
sort of thing. So, and training's important, right? We go through the procedures, but the real world phishing is brutal out there when they really get in.
Absolutely. And one example that I'll give that we experienced ourselves actually. You might have seen on one of the earlier slides, but our CEO is D Smith, and everyone has their LinkedIn profiles, and they say that they're an analyst at Strategic Insight Group, and D has his own LinkedIn profile, and somebody put the pieces together and attempted to send an analyst an email alleging that they were D and they needed this very important thing done extremely quickly. And all of a sudden, you're an entry level employee that is receiving an email from the CEO, and right, it tries to induce this sense of panic that you were talking about earlier. And so folks will do that, and try to leverage that kind of information. And it's not something that everybody in your organization has to stay off all LinkedIn or all social media, but it's important. Look at the small things. Can you tell that this is coming from an external organization, right? All the little things, and like you said, encouraging them to go to IT or compliance, and making sure that they're comfortable in doing so, and that they know just because they got this email, they're not in trouble, right? This happens to everybody. So that's an instance in our own, in our own, my own company, where we've seen that kind of thing, and where they do that very targeted phishing attempt.
That's crazy. And it's getting worse and worse. And not to mention, I mean, the rabbit hole that we could go down with AI and how much more convincing these conversations are becoming, because of AI, whether it's a video, right? Like now we have to have the thing where you wave your hand in front of your face to make sure it's not an AI type video when we're talking to people we don't know. Um, it's a whole different world, and it's going to be very interesting to see what comes,
Right.
with everything. So one of the questions jump over and call this one out. I'll kind of address it a little bit, and Adam, if you've got anything to add, and I'd encourage those listening to go in and jump in some more questions if you have. But one of the questions is, the app like Calendly dangerous to use and share? And Calendly is one of these, public booking calendars, that sort of thing. And I think the question is, it depends, right? Like so many things, it depends. I haven't done any research directly on Calendly, but if I was doing that type of research and came across it, I'm definitely going to be looking for vulnerabilities or way to pull your meetings out of Calendly. Did you share that link between your CRM, and can I guess that link, right? Can I guess that you're using Calendly? A lot of times you can. So a lot of time it just depends. There's so many variables there to know whether something's vulnerable, how are you using it, that sort of thing. So in and of itself, I don't necessarily think the app is not a good choice, right? Like I don't think it's leaking your meetings, but perhaps the way you're using it could be. Again, just kind of speaking generically here. But that's with a lot of things, I bring it up, and I'm sure I'm going to get hate emails from their crew again. But Redtail CRM, which was a big CRM for SEC registered firms, was basically publishing every record that went into their CRM in the open web. Like you could go in, search it, get people's social security numbers. They covered it up pretty quickly, right? But and you can find little bits and pieces about it when you search news. It was a pretty good cover up, but they were just, posting data out there, right? So a lot of times you don't know what the vulnerability is, right? You can take a system like Redtail, which everyone's using, and the back end may be leaking, and just nobody knows it yet. And
Yeah.
some right, like I mean, you've seen these type of things as well, Adam. Like you just sometimes it's in the way that you use it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I don't have anything additional to add there. I think you covered it all. But those are some great points. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Adam, that's pretty much all the questions we have in there. I think we covered a lot. I mean, just there's so much that we can dive into, and I know we're going to reconvene in probably a month and talk about some different issues. Like I said, like having chats with you is always is always a good time. And you mentioned D. I was going to mention too. We've had D on a previous webinar, and D is just one of those true polymaths. So that's definitely a video to check out if you wanna see what Dia about and a little bit more about SIG. But again, Adam, thanks for being on. Always
Absolutely.
an interesting conversation, and we'll definitely be back in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for having me, Brian, and thanks for everyone for joining. And if any questions come up that you might have after, feel free to reach out to us.
And Adam, I'll put your contact information and the email that goes around with this recording in case people want to reach out and chat with you. Highly recommend it. It's always a good time chatting with you.
Thank you. You as well.
All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll follow up shortly, and thanks for spending this Thursday afternoon with us. Hope everyone has a great day and a good weekend ahead.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.